Okay, now we're recording. So this is something I do every class, record what's going on, because you're here for this class, and you may be like, wait, he was talking about something right after that thing we did. What was that? So as soon as we're done with class, I hit stop, and then I upload it to that YouTube page that's on D2L, right? So that means you can go back and watch the entire class, and occasionally some stuff messes up, but what is this? I got a question happening on the other side. Occasionally some stuff messes up, but usually not. So there's another thing I do. I don't know. I'll sort of move this off to the side so it doesn't get confusing. Let me go ahead and run something real quick. So the other thing I do is I create a Zoom meeting, which is way less exciting than it sounds. Zoom. That sounds really exciting, doesn't it? Really, all it is a web conferencing meeting. Now, the reason I do that is for a couple things. If let's say you're like, you have to go out of town for something, but you're like, oh, it's just like, I got to go out of town, but I could still hop in and watch that meeting. I mean, obviously, you can go back and watch the video, right? You could watch it if you were somewhere else. What is really beneficial for, though, is you could watch what's on my screen on your screen. And so that means there's no bad seat in this place, right? There's not like, I'm stuck in the back and I can't see what he's clicking on. Because some of those buttons are really tiny, and sometimes the text is really small. And so it's really pretty helpful for you to be able to log into that meeting. So this is me. I'm the only person in the meeting right now. I'm going to start sharing this screen, right? And so this is what will happen, is for you to be able to see, yes, share. So for you to be able to see this, you just have to log into this meeting as well. So I'll show you how to do that. If we go down to our File Explorer here, this little folder down here, it's going to open up File Explorer. So we're going to go up to the ETSU E3 server that we've all been talking about. So you've maybe done this for other classes. It's / ETSU E3. Oh, somebody's already... I need to set this up to automatically admit people. Does that not work? / ETSU E3. So the backslash is the one above your enter key. It's the one that's, the top of it is angled back. And it's ETSU, the school you're going to. E was originally like the name of the server drive. This is our third one, ETSU E3. So we actually recently, as in like in the last week, got a whole bunch more storage space. So a couple of things we did kind of look, I don't remember if we looked at this with this class or another class. This is our space to do some stuff with. A lot of these folders you'll never click on. Like actually some of them you can't click on. The three to look at, DIGM classes. This is where all of your class content will be. Let's see waiting room. Admit. So this is the waiting room. DIGM classes is where all of your class information is going to be stored, right? So whenever you're turning anything in, or whether I'm trying to give you a file, like if I had something, I was like, oh yeah, let me give you a copy of that really quick. I will throw that up there for you to pull it down because it's faster than D2L. And so we'll find our class in there in a second. DIGM faculty is like my personal storage space for like where I can put lecture material and stuff like that. You usually don't have access to that because we don't want you peeking. But you do have access to this DIGM students folder. And this is where, if you look in here under share, yours probably isn't going to have as many names in here. Under share, this is where you can create a folder for yourself. Right? And once you've created that, there's a lot of storage space up here for you to temporarily work. Right? It's not going to be like, I would not advise you to be like, that's the only place that all of my files live. Because once a year we wipe this server. Right? Once a year we erase everything, and people have lost like their entire freshman year because they didn't back it up. This is more of like, I'm working on the bridge project this week. I'm going to go ahead and put my bridge files up there and work on them while I'm here in the lab. what you should probably do is back that up occasionally on that little fob you got or whatever hard drive you have. And then once you're done with that project, pull the whole thing down and archive that, right? Put it in a couple of different places. But as you work here, you're welcome to put stuff up there. If we go back a folder from share up to this DIGM students, all the way at the top, 0 students resources, there's some stuff in here for you. Some of these are stuff like textures, these HDR panoramas, so we can use those for light mapping. There's some character rigs in there that are kind of old. So there's a bunch of different stuff up here that's just for you to use, right? A lot of it's actually kind of not as useful. But one of the ones that's pretty useful, some of you heard about the render farm the other night. Render farm instructions. How to use the render farm tutorial. That's pretty good. There's still some questions you may have. But remember that that's there, and I'll remind you as we get a little bit closer on some of these projects. But if you're just like, feeling like you want to skip ahead a little bit or like you spend some extra time on stuff, that's a worthwhile video to watch. Marty Fitzgerald made that video so you can kind of understand how the render farm works. We'll talk about it more later, but render farms really is like, if you ever watch like the behind the scenes in a Pixar movie or a DreamWorks movie, and they're like, it took 26 hours to render every frame of this animation, and if we rendered the entire thing on one computer, it would take 400 years. That was my best impersonation of the narrator voice, but they don't render it on one computer. They just have a lot of computers, and each of those computers renders one frame each. Well, we have a lot of computers in this building too, right? There's labs that are empty right now where nobody's working, and what the render farm does is it uses the processing power of each of those computers to render one frame of your animation. We also saved all of the last generation computers, all of the ones that these replaced, and they are in room 195 downstairs on a big rack. And you can actually go in there and see them. They're loud and like the fans are messing up on them. But they can still render, right? And so there's, I don't think it's 100, I think it's 60 of those, right? And so that means if you have an animation that's taking like, let's say it's taking 10 minutes a frame, right, to render that, and you just need to render one 30 frame segment, right? Like that's a long time, right? If you're rendering on one computer, but it's only 10 minutes if you're rendering on 30 computers, right? So, so that's what this is about. So the reason I'm having you go up here, one is to kind of explore this, but the other is if we go all the way back to ETSU E3, our DIGM classes folder, under Greg, you're going to see you're going to see a few different things. These are my old classes. So if you want to go back and look at what some previous students did, feel free to kind of look around in there. This is actually just this thing I share with some people about how to use camera staging and framing and stuff. Feel free to watch those if you get bored. I have 2 classes that I'm teaching this semester in person. One is this class, Principles of Animation, and then I also teach a 2D animation class. It's kind of experimental at this point. It's not regularly on the curriculum. We're teaching a few sections of it to see if it should be. And so far the consensus is yes. So that one may be a class that's offered in the future. But all the stuff for this class is going to be under the POA folder, right? So resources, submissions, currently both of those are empty. It's pretty simple to understand. Resources is where I give you stuff. Submissions is where you give me stuff, right? So when we have a project that's due, there'll be a folder in there. I'll probably put all the folders in there pretty soon. Exercise 1 will be due. You can put it in there. Project 1 will be due. There'll be a folder in there, and you'll just name your file correctly. Like name it something that I can identify. I don't know anybody's names right now. What's your name? Rosette.
Cosette.
Cosette. What's your last name?
Simmons.
Cosette Simmons. Project 1.mp4. Right. Just your name, so I know whose project I'm looking at, and some indicator of what it is. Right. A lot of people are very strict about the naming. I just want to know what I'm looking at, and you've been communicating for at least 18 years. So you can figure out how to communicate to me what I'm looking at. If I see one that's like, render, like, okay, whose render? of what? And so that's where that when you're putting files in there, that's what that's for. So just letting you know where all this is at. When it comes time to turn stuff in, I'll remind you. But if we step back all the way to the Greg folder, all things Greg lives here, we're going to look at this Zoom meeting, right? So if you open this, this is just a link. You can right click, or you can double click and open it. It'll probably open it in Windows Explorer. If you want to drag it into a Chrome browser, you can open it that way. But what this is going to do is it's going to allow you to log in to this web conferencing meeting. And I'm having to admit you all right now for some reason, but you should then be able to see my screen in your browser on your computer. Is that working?
You gotta let me in, but yes.
Okay. Yeah, I'm getting people coming in right now. So 8 participants in the meeting, 3 people waiting.
Mine wants me to download it somewhere.
Wait, how do I make it small?
Yeah, sometimes it does a it wants to install like a little app in your browser, and if it does that, that's fine. It may make you do that every time. These computers are kind of weird. Some stuff is installed on it, all of these computers, but they're all based off of the same installation of another computer. It's called an image, and you can install like a game on here or something like that, or anything you want. And then log off and log back on, and that game will still be there. But if you shut the computer down and start it back up, it's like it's a brand new installation of all of that stuff, right? And so it wipes all that other stuff off of it, and it's just the stuff that the computer came with. So, so if the computer's shut down, then you may have to reinstall that little app again. But admit all. So this isn't something that you have to do. I'm going to try to set this up to auto admit. I keep forgetting to change that, but I don't think I can change it while I'm doing this. Okay. So, but that should let you in, let you see the screen. Is everybody able to see the screen? I'm going to be nosy and look around and see. All right, cool. So that's one of the benefits of this wide monitor. Not quite as beneficial as if we had an extra monitor, which is actually what I'm more of a fan of having you all a second monitor to watch this on. But this is something you can kind of put on half of your screen. An interesting shortcut key, for those of you who don't know, if you have a window selected, if you hit the Windows key and then an arrow, like let's say to this side, Windows that way, it will dock a window to that side of your screen, right? And that way you can always use the other side for whatever you want to. All right, oh, one more person waiting. If you're waiting in the waiting room for too long, like wave me down. I've just overlooked it. Okay, so I'm going to try to do this every day. I'll be recording the class, and I'll be sort of live streaming this class to all of your computers. If something messes up, or if for some reason I forget to start streaming, I only really do it when it's going to be a significant lecture. If it's just going to be like, hey, I just want to mention a few things, I'm not going to worry about recording that or broadcasting it. It's just the stuff that it's helpful for you to be able to follow along with. Okay. So, before we jump into, I already did that. Before we jump in too deep to Maya, and we're going to get into Maya today, and it's going to be an interesting day. What's happening? Oh, there's a chat going on. Ooh, interesting. F mega. So before we get into this too far, let's look kind of briefly at D2L content. So as we were saying earlier, week 0, that was last week before class started. This is it. I tried to give everybody access to it in case you wanted to hop in there and peek. I don't remember if it actually went through for this class or not, but some classes, if you're taking this class online, the first day you'll want to have your software installed, right? So week 0 is just like how to do stuff before class started if you needed to. You can always refer back to that if you decide to install Maya later on. Week 1 is this week. And it begins on Monday and ends on Sunday. So all the directions for that should be in here. So obviously we go through directions, kind of a quick summary of what we're going to be learning and what's going to be due. So there's going to be a graded discussion post and comments due this week. A quiz on your understanding of the syllabus and content. How many of you have taken that quiz? Okay. Everybody has to. Okay? So if you don't take that quiz, like you only get 1 discussion post grade in this class because the other 16 are hiding. Right? So you have to do that for those to actually to become visible for you. It's a really easy quiz. It's basically on your understanding of the syllabus. If you fail it the first time, you can take it a gazillion times and it's not going to affect. It's whatever your highest grade is on that. So really, you could just close your eyes and click and eventually get through that test. Right? So trying to make that as easy as possible for you. And then we're going to have an assignment to construct a bridge model in Maya. This is not really going to be due this week. We're starting it this week. So the assignment, we'll kick that off later today. Now, a lot of what I'm going to be going over today is, for all this stuff too, we have like a checklist, things you'll need to look at. This is going to look different in yours. Let me view it as a student so you can see it. So the checklist will look like this. So some stuff to do, double check to make sure you can open those files, watch the video lessons, download the bridge files, assemble the bridge, complete your discussion post, which is due today at midnight, and respond to at least 2 of your classmates' discussion posts, which is due at Sunday at midnight. You can do both of those today, because I'm confident that there's people who have already posted. So you can get those done early. I give everybody all the way till Sunday. I don't know, it's the weekend. A discussion post is something you can do on your phone if you want to do. D2L will work on your phone. It gets ugly on your phone. Like, all the banners will be like stretched and weird and stuff. I don't know why it's not got more accessibility options, but and then of course taking that quiz. So you have till Sunday to do that. That quiz shuts down at Sunday, which effectively means if you haven't taken that quiz, the highest grade you can get in this class is a 70 because you won't have access to all of the rest of those discussions. Please take the quiz. Okay. Okay. So when we go into this next thing here, the content, we got these video lessons. This is what we're going to be going over today in a different way. Right? Actually, I'm going to need to open up something as well. DIG. Forgot to open up my lectures folder just so I'll have this. So these are much more concise, like 3 minutes or 2.5 minutes long, right? Like you can watch all of this. This will be under an hour's worth of information, but not as colorful as the live version of the show. So feel free to watch through those anytime you want to. And also, I'll bring it back just for a second. There's some supplemental stuff that we're going to look at a little bit later as well. So there's other stuff under content. I'm just reminding you that this is where that stuff is. And then this is where the bridge files are for you to be able to download it. So we'll bring that back here in a bit, but we're not really doing that just yet. Let me get my... Really? Sorry. Let me... was not as prepared for today as I thought I was. Sign in. There's a PowerPoint I forgot I needed. Yes, I sometimes use PowerPoint. There it is. I'll just put this on my desktop. Okay. So how many of you have opened Maya? In the past, at least once. All right. Let's try it today. So the easiest way to do this for me is to go to this little start menu here and just start typing. M-A, there it is, Maya 2019. Okay. So let me ask the inverse of that question. How many of you have never opened Maya? Okay, you're in for a treat. So it's actually opening on my other screen because I don't know why. But I'll pull it over here in a second. You should, when you click that, you'll start getting this little loading thing. And then Maya will open and it will give you this. It will probably also give you a couple of little pop-ups. Yes?
Yes. I got a pop-up saying that my version has not yet had preferences set, and they detected old preferences have been detected, or I can just create default.
Have you used Maya before?
I have.
Did you have any like buttons or anything that you saved?
I had a couple of buttons, but I don't know why I would need them now.
You can still use the old preferences if you want to. Like that would be the worst case scenario is that you would get to keep some of the like buttons and scripts that you might have made. So.
Okay.
Yes.
So let me just select license.
Ooh. So yeah, let's see. Is anybody else getting? So. So what I would say. Yeah, try multi-user. Single license server. And the server name, type EPSU E3. Okay. I don't know why. I was having a hard time finding a license server. Worst case scenario, I would say there's probably an issue here. If this one starts to be buggy, we'll stick that one next to it. It looks like it works. Okay, cool.
Okay, wait.
Okay, so a couple of you probably got a couple of pop-ups. One is Maya saying, "Can I collect your data?" Everybody else is. Like so yeah.
They're already saying okay.
Can't you just take it from Google? They already have all of it. So yes, it's whatever you want to do. Yeah, I like that it gives you no other options. It also gives you this, and this is kind of helpful if you've used Maya before. Every version of Maya, they made some changes, and basically what this is saying is if there was a change in this version, it's going to put these little green brackets around it, so you'll know that one's new or that there's a change to it. Right? That's kind of handy after you've used it for a while. You're like, ooh, what did they do to the PlayBlast tool? Let's look at that. It's up to you on whether you want that to show or not. But the one button in here that says show this at startup, you can uncheck that and hit OK. And now if you close down Maya today, don't do it, but if you close down Maya today and reopened it, it wouldn't ask you that question again. However, once you log off and log back on, it'll probably ask you again, right? So that's just the pop-ups that you get when you first install Maya. So there's that. So if you've never opened Maya before, or even if you have, you may have just forgotten how daunting this user interface can seem, right? There's so much stuff on this thing. I'll turn this camera just a little bit. There's like hundreds of little buttons everywhere, and none of them have like names. Like they're all like, oh, there's an eye clapper or a movie clapper with an eyeball on it. Like, what does that even mean? And it can just be like, how am I ever going to memorize all of these? Well, you're not. We're gonna categorize all of these, and there are tools that you'll learn to memorize them. But first, let's just kind of look at the interface in general, right? So in general, we have a menu across the top, right? Just like you do in pretty much every other software package you've ever used. This menu is interesting because like everything that happens in Maya, in some way or another, you can find through this menu, which seems hard to believe considering it's not any bigger than Word's menu, right? But pretty much everything we can find in here. The way that works is if you step right down below it, like we got here to mesh, right? You'll see that there's a whole bunch of stuff in here, right? And the way this sort of embeds itself is if I go down to Booleans, you'll see that expands out and there's more options in here. Now, when you're selecting something from the menu, I can click it or I can click that little box on the end, and this box will bring up extra options about the thing that I'm clicking. The other kind of neat thing about Maya's menus is sometimes you need to use some of them quite a bit. And you see this little double line that goes across the top? If I just click that, it will tear off that menu and I can have an extra version of it. Now don't worry, if you close it, Mesh is still there. You didn't like delete the Mesh menu or anything like that. That's just a temporary version of it. Now the way this menu is very flexible is that right below the menu, there's this modeling, or this bar right here. This is called our status line. So our status line lets us change what status of process we are in, right? And right now it's set to modeling. So you remember that mesh menu we have right here, right? That's because we're in the modeling menu. So if I click on that and change that to animation, you'll see that all of the things that are in my menu above that change. So now I have a whole new set of options in my menu. So sometimes that's the issue. I'm like, go to your mesh menu, and you're like, I don't have mesh. It's because you're in the wrong status, right? So we can go to modeling. There's a handful of different ones here. So right down along this, there's some other things that are pretty common. If you're installing at home, one of the new things is out here where it says sign in. When you've downloaded the program, they add like a license to your login for the Autodesk website. And so this is how you can just log into the Autodesk website and your license will just work. So we have that. A lot of these buttons in between here, let's not worry about those too much right now. You'll notice some of these first few. There's open, save, new, undo, redo. Anybody know the shortcut keys for undo? Control Z, right? Yeah, I have Control Z just tattooed down my back. Right? You will. I just keep my hand on Control Z all the time because that is one of the great benefits of digital is you can undo what you just messed up, right? You can also redo what you just messed up if you'd like. So right down below this status line is our shelf. And so this is kind of familiar maybe from some other software packages that we have these little tabs for different sets of icons. And so again, like if we're in the modeling phase of this project, we can go to Polygon Modeling and we'll see that here's a bunch of tools for that. The shelf doesn't contain all of the tools in Maya. It contains some of the most commonly used tools, right? And there's also a custom shelf out there where you can build some of your own buttons for tasks that you do a lot, right? So that was the question that you asked. What was your name again? Kate. So the question Kate asked about your preferences, that's one of the things that it could have saved, is if, you had made a button for, to repeat a certain process, you can save that up there in your custom menu. So this is the shelf. I think the thing you're going to start to recognize is that Maya has a way to do almost everything more than one way, right? Like you want to save a file, you can go to File, Save, or you can hit that Save button, or you can hit Control S, or you can hit Control Alt S, and it will save it with a number at the end, right? There's also a handful of other ways. You can use a marking menu. You can use a whole bunch of different stuff. Everything you can do in Maya, Maya has given you multiple ways of doing it, so you can use whatever workflow preference you like the most. And I know from your perspective right now, you're like, how am I supposed to know what workflow preference I like the most? And the answer is trial and error. you will discover that throughout the semester. Some of you will like using shortcut keys way more than others. Some of you will like using the marking menu. Some of you will only go to the menu for certain things. And everybody's different. Everybody will learn differently, and their workflow that makes them most productive will be different. What I will say is to try the others, right? If you're like, I love going to the menu, well, try a shortcut key. You may be surprised how much that speeds you up on certain things. Okay. So down the side, we're gonna start on I'm really bad with my left and my right. I have to do that thing every time. On the left side, I don't know why. I just never stuck when I was like in the first grade. I was paying more attention to the ABCs. Left and right just slipped right past me. So down the left side of our screen, right? Correct. We have this is called our toolbar. Now, can you all see that, or I'm not cropping it? It's cropping it a little tight. I may resize my thing here so you can see it a little bit better. There we go. So down my left side, we have our toolbar. These are some really, these are probably the tools you're going to use the most. And that word is pretty significant, tool, right? There are certain things that are in your menu up there that are not tools, they're processes, right? It's like I'm going to ask Maya to smooth an object for me. I'm not using a smooth tool, right? I'm just asking it to do this thing to it, to run a process on it. A tool is something that might have features to it, right? Think of like if you use Photoshop, your brush tool, right? You maybe have your brush will be a little smaller or a little bigger, right? So some of the most commonly used tools are down this menu here, and we're actually going to look at them very soon. But it's stuff like select and move and rotate and scale, right? Those main you got to do that stuff a lot, right? And so that's just this big section there where you can select those things. Down right below this is some of our viewport settings. So these little buttons that show us what's going on in the viewport, or how our viewport can be laid out. Now we'll be looking at viewport here pretty in depth in a few minutes. So let's hop all the way over to the right side, and you'll see that we have a whole bunch of different stuff down the right side for options. Right? So let's actually, I think this is going to make more sense if we kind of step back and we actually start doing something in the viewport, right? So first things first, let's move around in the viewport, right? We see this grid. It implies that there's a world in here, and it is. Like the way you should be thinking of this giant gray area in the center is this like window into the 3D world, right? And so what's actually happening in here will happen in real time, and it's a virtual 3D space that we can navigate around in, create things in, and move things around in, right? So the first thing I'd like to do is navigate, right? And just so I can see what I'm navigating around, I'm going to go ahead and create an object. So you remember our shelf up here? Let's go to polygon modeling, and let's just create a sphere. So we have an object. It's green. It's got a bunch of little like lines all over it. We'll talk about those lines later. And it's in the middle of our screen. Now you'll realize when I made that, it made it right at the center of that grid that's on the floor. Now we're going to talk about that grid a little bit more later, but that's where it's going to make all new objects. It's going to create them right there at the center point, or what we call the origin point. Right? Now, I know that there's stuff on the other side of this sphere. I want to be able to see it. Right? It's really just, it's more sphere. Spoiler. But I want to be able to get closer to it. I want to be able to move around this object. Right? And so the way to think of this is like we're looking through a camera at this, because we actually are. We're actually looking through, down here at the bottom, PERSP, we're looking through a virtual camera into this virtual world. So what I want to be able to do is move where my camera is. Right? I want to be able to be over there on the other side of it. Right? And so we're going to use camera terminologies for how we move around. So this is an interactive portion here. You may have already discovered some of this. Everything is going to revolve around the Alt key. So it's like right next to your space bar. So hold down your Alt key with your mouse in the viewport. Hold down Alt, and then click your left mouse button, the one that's your index finger is probably hovering on it. Click it and hold it down, and you'll see that if you drag your mouse, you can tumble around this scene. Okay, so I just used the word there, tumble. Yeah, that is a camera terminology. Some of you will be like, we're orbiting around it. Yeah, pretty much the same thing, right? We are, the sphere is staying the same distance from our camera. Our camera is traveling in sort of a spherical circle around this thing, right? And so that's really nice. If I'm like, oh, I want to see the other side, Alt, left click, tumble around. Now again, there are tricks to be able to do this differently, but really this is the best way for navigation, is this Alt mouse button. So that's why you usually work with your hand on the mouse and one hand on the keyboard. And Maya, you really will kind of hover around the Alt and Control keys at most times. So let's try one of the other mouse buttons. If I do Alt and then right click, hold that down, you'll see that I'm getting in there closer. Right? Now, there is a slight terminology distinction that needs to be made here. A lot of people just, when you're chatting about it, like very casually, will say, zoom in. Zoom in there where I can see it closer. And I maybe will even say that as well. We're not really zooming. This is called dollying. If it's a camera terminology, somebody's holding a camera and you tell them to zoom in, what they do is they twist the lens gets longer, and it looks like you get closer. But the camera's staying in the same place if you're zooming, right? Many of you have actually used a camera with a zoom lens before, right? So zooming is actually, the camera is staying stationary. You're just changing your depth of field, your perspective, in order to see something up closer. It's like putting binoculars on, right? So you can see it closer. What we are actually doing is, physically, in this virtual world, we are moving our perspective camera closer to the object. So with these Alt mouse key buttons that we're using, we are physically manipulating a virtual camera. Right? Always think of it that way. We are moving where our camera is so we can see this from a different angle. So, try those again. Alt, right click, dolly in and out. Alt, left click, tumble around. So this is really nice. Like I can get to most angles of this with these two things. But there's still one thing left, which is I want to be able to move my camera from side to side or up and down, like in sort of this view, right? The same thing as if I were standing here with my camera and I just wanted to do this, right? I didn't want to go in a circle. I wanted to move from side to side. So we're going to go ahead and use the word pan for that. So if I hold down Alt and middle click, I can pan. Now, some of you may be like, wait. Middle click, what you talking about? So, middle click is that little mouse wheel. Right? Now, something you'll notice is that if you scroll that little mouse wheel, it will also dolly you in and out. Right? And that's a kind of a quicker way of doing that when you want to do that. It's got these incremental like chunks to it, right? It's not like very versus alt right click. I can very smoothly get in and out. This is going to sort of clunk back and forth. But that's also a button. If you push down on your middle click button or on your scroll wheel, you'll feel a little click. Right? And that's something that takes a little bit of practice to get used to. But alt middle click will let you pan side to side. So these three tools, or these three navigation, I guess, yeah, tools might be the right word, are going to allow you to, right, somebody's still waiting to get in. Admit. Sorry about that. So these three navigation features are going to allow you to be able to put your camera pretty much anywhere in this entire scene. Right? Like if there's a place you need to get your camera to, these three things will get you there. Right? Now, I think I told you, the first time I ever used Maya, I started getting this like neck cramp because I was doing this all the time because I was very stressed. And this is actually probably the reason. Is because it's like, wait, I'm going to hit the wrong button and then suddenly I'm going to be way over there, right? And yeah, that is what's going to happen. Like, that's why it's one of the first things we're talking about, is this is something you kind of have to practice. It's to the point now that, like, it's automatic too. I don't even, it's like driving your car, right? Or you're like, uh-oh, those people in front of me are slowing down. How do I stop this thing again? It's one of these pedals. It's this one. And then by that time you would have already wrecked, right? No, it's all muscle memory stuff for you. The only way to get that muscle memory is to go through that period of like, oh wait, is it this one? And human nature is to kind of resist that struggle a little bit, right? And be like, I'm just gonna leave the camera where it is. I can figure it out from here. And you'll be like working on your model and be microscopic. You're like, I can't remember how to get in there, and I'm just gonna try to move it from here. Like, I'm putting this out there to you to challenge yourself. Like, if it feels uncomfortable where you're trying to look at your model from, move your camera around. Like, practice that. And the more you do that, the easier, like the less that neck cramp will bother you, right? Maybe you just want to go ahead and schedule a chiropractor visit now. But it's very tense. And every software is like that. Actually, everything is like that. I had also very similar neck cramps trying to play like songs on the guitar in high school, right? And I was like, I'm messing it up. And my pinky doesn't do what I would like it to do sometimes. Like, I don't have any control of that. And like, it's frustrating. Like, your body doesn't seem like it wants to do the thing you know it needs to do. And that's all just practice. Like, the more you fight with that, the better that will get. So, all right, so we're tumbling around, we're dollying in and out, we're panning from side to side. And if I'm like, ooh, I want to see what the back side of this looks like, I can tumble around here. If I want to see it from underneath, I can go under. If I want to sort of zoom in, get closer, if I want to twirl around over to here, it's all going to just be how much you practice this. So spend some time practicing it, and the first project is actually designed to sort of make you practice it a little bit. Okay, so we got this. We got the ability to move our camera wherever we want to. I also want to be able to move my object wherever I want to. Right? Now, the object is highlighted in green. That actually means it's selected. One of the ways we can tell the object is selected, other than it's highlighted in this, like the wireframe is all green, right, is that you'll see it's loaded up over here on the side. There's some information over there about it. P sphere 1. P stands for polygon. We'll talk about what polygons mean later. But just to show you, like, if I accidentally click over here, right, I've deselected it. If I need to select it again, how do I select it? So the cool thing about Maya is like as long as your mouse looks like this little arrow, just drag it and select it. Right. So if I can also click and select it, but eventually, you'll get into the habit of just doing like a quick little drag to select stuff. It's a little faster. It also allows you to select more than one thing. Like if there's more than one thing in that marquee, it will select all of them. Right? So if I have this object selected, I'm going to show you one more quick thing on navigation. Eventually, some of you are going to accidentally mess up your navigation. You're going to be zooming around here, and you're going to go over here. You're going to tumble, and you're going to be like, oh no. What do I do? And I'm like, oh, it's over here somewhere. Oh, I can see it. Oh, it's over there. Okay, 2 quick shortcut keys for you. If you hit A, it's going to frame everything in your scene. Right? So if you had a whole bunch of models, it would just put all of that into your scene. A for all, right? Now, I only have one thing selected, so it's going to be very similar, but if I was way over here and I wanted to be focused back on... So you see what's happening is I'm tumbling around a different pivot point now because I've moved my camera around so much. If I want to focus back on that ball, so that ball is my pivot point, and I have the ball selected, if I hit F, F will focus us back on that, or frame the object. Either of those will help you remember that key. So, and so now that's back at my center point, and when I tumble around, I'm there. So again, being able to select it lets you just hit F, and you can go back to it. So now that I have the ball selected, I want to move it somewhere else so I can make some more objects in this scene. So 3 more shortcut keys we're going to talk about, but the buttons for them are over here. You'll recognize that little arrow is already highlighted in blue. That's our selection tool, right? I'll show you there's some other selection tools under here as well. I can click this thing and draw like weird shapes to select stuff, right? But for the most part, that selection tool is what we want to be able to use to select stuff. The shortcut key to activate that selection the selection tool is Q. So just for a second, look down at your keyboard. See where the letter Q is? Okay. There's several letters that follow it. W, E, and R. Okay? So we have our sphere selected. Hit W. Color. You'll also notice what it did is it switched from our selection tool down here to our move tool. W is move. So Q is select, W is move. Now how our move tool works will probably be pretty self-explanatory as you mess around with it, but it will create this little locator in the center, right? And if I just sort of grab this little yellow box at the very center of that, if I click sort of right where all those converge, I can just click that and move it around, right? I can also move it in a single axis or direction, right? So if I want to move it just along this axis, which is our x-axis, I can click here, sort of drag it side to side. Or if and you're seeing it's only moving in one direction now. If I just wanted to move it up and down, grab this green one, move it up and down. And you'll also see that there's kind of like these little planes floating out here. That will just move it in 2 axes at a time. Now we'll talk about that phrase axis in just a second here. Actually, no, let's talk about it now. Now it's a good time. Okay. So we're going to come back to this in a minute. We'll come back to Maya in just a minute. Right now, I'm going to open up a slideshow. Look at that. Okay. Piece of string. I downloaded that for free on the internet. It was completely legal. This is Creative Commons. No attribution. Everything's fine. I'm not breaking any laws. So you already kind of understand this system. It's called the Cartesian coordinate system. Some of you learned that in a class that you may or may not have liked. Probably math class, geometry, something like that. Right? Cartesian coordinate system is a way that we've sort of developed to be able to communicate distances, areas to anybody, right? All you need is a couple of different numbers to be able to make that communication. So let's say I have a piece of string, but I don't have any scissors. I know somebody who does have some scissors. They're downstairs in the office. Radina has some scissors, and I would be curious if you would take that string downstairs and have Radina cut that string for me at a very specific length, right? And you're like, yeah, sure. How long do you want it? Well, there's so many ways I could try to communicate that. I could try to draw it on the string, but I don't have a pencil. Or whatever. I could like try to pinch it, be like, hold it right there. That's where it needs to be cut. But really, we already have a system for this, right? It's measurement. As long as we know where the end of our string is, I just need to tell you a distance from the end of that string, right? Just one dimension, one number. We'll call that number x, right? So I can say, let me give you some information. X equals 12, right? And so if you know that, or I'm sorry, x equals 3, because it's on the spreadsheet. X equals 3. And if you know x equals 3, let's say inches, right? You can count over 1, 2, 3 inches, and you know exactly where to cut, right? So I can give you that string, say 3 inches. You go down there, Radina will be like, here's the end of the string, 1, 2, 3, cut. And you can bring me back, every one of you can bring me back the exact same length of string, right? That is a communication system we've established. So it gets a little more complicated when you add a second dimension to it, right? We got a piece of paper with a pencil or a pen and a piece of paper, and I'm like, I need a dot drawn in a very specific spot on this piece of paper. Well, now we just need one extra dimension, right? We already know about x from side to side. We need y. We need up and down, right? So if I just tell you x equals 3, y equals 2, you can go x over 3, y up 2, and we can find that point where that converges, right? We can make the same dot on the same piece of paper, everybody in this room. All you need is an origin point and 2 dimensions. 2-dimensional, right? Like you're drawing 2D animation, 2D illustration, because there's no depth in this. I mean, paper has thickness, but we're still just focusing on that 2 sides. So we get into a 3D space, and we nothing is really just 2-dimensional. Every piece of paper has a tiny bit of thickness, but to find a specific spot in a room, you'll need one more dimension, right? We're going to need z. So the way we look at this, sorry, I'm not clicked on my thing anymore. X, I can say, side to side x, up and down is y, right? So we have this z-axis gives us depth, right? So say forward and back. So if I say x equals 5, y equals 2, z equals 5, and go over 5, up 2, and in depth 5 more, and you'll see that we got that little bitty glass thing full of leaves. You need leaves on your coffee table. It's important. Right. So this is the Cartesian coordinate system, x, y, z. Now in Maya, we're going to continue to use that x, y, z, and something this is important to remember: x, y, z, RGB. What's RGB? Red, green, blue. We see this a lot in color. If you took Photoshop, you've heard RGB. You've also heard CMYK. That's what the printer kind of converts RGB to. But almost all digital imagery uses red, green, and blue to mix together to make any other color, right? So in Maya and almost every other system, you can tell which axis you're looking at based off of that schematic, or based off that pneumatic device, X, Y, Z, RGB, right? X is red, Y is green, Z is blue. So back to Maya. X, right there, is my X direction, right? And so the really cool thing about this is I can actually precisely control this, right? If we look over here in the right side of my screen, my channel box, I have this selected, and you'll see I have translate X, Y, and Z. So I can move this very precisely if I want to. If I want to move this over 2 units, up 3 units, and forward 5 units, I can do that. This is really an important element of this. Because this means if I want more than one object in that same location, that's all I need, 2, 3, 5, right? Now, most of the time you're working in Maya, you're not typing numbers. You are usually basing this off of aesthetic reasons, but there are times that you may need those very precise numbers. For example, let's say I needed something evenly spaced. You know, I can have a whole bunch of spheres and I need them all to be 3 units apart from each other. Well, I can do some math, right? 3, 6, 9, 12, and I can just space them individually to get that even spacing, right? Okay. Where's my mouse? There it is. Let me minimize this. So we know we can do that. The other cool thing is I can do a couple of other things in my channel box here. I can highlight these and type 0. And since I had all 3 of them highlighted, I can replace all of those numbers with 0 and put it back at the origin. Right? I can also, if I wanted to just sort of slide this along my x-axis, obviously I could grab my x channel here, but I can also highlight the word translate x, and I can go out here in my viewport and middle mouse click while not holding Alt, and it will slide it back and forth, and you'll see that number adjusts in real time. Now, if you don't have the word highlighted, if you just go out here and click this number right here, if you click it one time and slide it side to side, it will do it too, but it's going to snap to whole numbers. Right? If I click here and middle click, it'll be a little bit more finite control of that. So let's go ahead and I want to go ahead and leave this at 0, 0, 0 for right now. So actually, just so we can see it better, I'm actually going to delete my sphere. So I'm going to select it and just hit the delete button, and it got rid of it. It's not in our viewport anymore, or it's not in our scene anymore. So I'm going to go ahead and create a cube just so you can see this. So just like being able to translate it, I can also rotate this thing. Right? So again, looking at your keyboard, Q is select, W is move, E is rotate. So we get this little orb, and again, X, Y, and Z. So I can rotate in individual channels, or I can just sort of click out here in the open and rotate in all 3 of them at once. Okay? So Q is select, W is move, E is rotate. So what do you think R might be? Scale. Right? And this one's interesting. We can select in the middle, make the whole thing smaller, the whole thing bigger, or I can scale it in one direction or the other. Right? I can do something like this. Let's start getting something a little bit more dynamic. So again, I can do all these things. I can move it, I can rotate it, I can scale it, I can do like variety of stuff. And what I want you to realize is that those 3 things together, each having 3 axes, gives us these numbers in our channel box over here. Translate x is negative 0.718. And all of those numbers tell us something about that object's location. Now that's going to be significant later because animation is just changing an object's location, right? We're just changing those values. So, okay, so you got that. I want to talk a little bit more about the channel box over here just as we're going along. So we got the channel box. If you go down a little lower, there's this inputs section, right? And we have something in here called Polycube1. Now there's some information about this object in here, but we're not really going to worry about it too much right now. Just recognize that there are things that goes into making this model, like how many spans an object has. So let me just kind of click off of that box, create a new sphere. And if I go over here to Polysphere 1 and click that under Inputs, you'll see that I have stuff like Subdivision Axis, and it's set to 20, and the radius is set to 1. So if I scroll in here a little bit and click on Subdivision Axis and start making that lower, you're seeing that I'm changing some of the fundamental building blocks of how this object was made. Right? That information continues to exist. Right? That is part of Maya's history of that object, right? Every object is made because of a series of processes and tools that you apply to it. And over time, all of that information builds up, but sometimes you need to be able to take a step back and make a small change to stuff. So that is Maya's history of how the object is created. That will come into play a few weeks down the road. And again, like as I showed you before, you can drag select and get both of these. Another thing to recognize is that even if I'm in the move, rotate, or scale tool, I don't have to go back to the selection tool to select it. I can select within these tools. So if I'm in the move tool, I can still drag and select these, right? And now I can move them both. Now, the interesting thing is I'm moving them both. Watch what happens when I try to rotate them both. Maybe not exactly what you expected, right? You may have expected those to rotate from the center of both of them. Each of these objects has its own pivot point, the location from which it moves, rotates, or scales. And if you select them individually, you'll see where that is. If I select this, hit W, the pivot point for this is right there where these three lines converge. Right? I can actually change my object's pivot point, but right now we're not going to. Because if I select my sphere, you see it also has a different pivot point. When I select both of them, it's going to move them. What did I just do? W. It's going to move them in the world sort of proportionally, because I'm moving them from side to side. But if I'm rotating them, they're going to rotate from their own center point. And if I scale them, they're going to scale from their own center point. Okay, does that make sense? All right. Any questions at this point? I know I'm throwing a lot at you. And some stuff, like if you're still kind of fighting with it a little bit, that's all right. But if anything, it's like, wait, I just do not understand that, or I don't know how we got to that. Stop me, raise your hand, I'll be more happy to do it. Yep.
There is a way to put them on the same pivot point, right?
There's a way to put them on the same pivot point, and we'll look at this a little bit, like probably next class period. What there also is a way to put them inside of an invisible container that has its own pivot point. It's like grouping them together, and then you would move the group of those two objects. And then that thing can have its own pivot point. And so, yeah, there's a lot of different alternatives for that. So, do you have a question as well? So seriously, I guess I should have said this earlier. Feel free to stop me at any point. I'm not going to be like, you interrupted the professor. That's not me. Yeah. This is completely casual. All right. So the interesting thing about the channel box is, well, one more thing about the channel box before we move on, is if we go all the way down to the bottom here, we have these layers. Okay? Onions have layers. Ogres have layers. And Maya has layers. They also stink a little bit. So Maya's layers don't necessarily work the same way as like Photoshop layers do, right? Maya's layers are just organizational. It's not like if I put a sphere in one layer and I duplicate that layer, I get a second sphere, and then I can multiply one sphere on top of the other. It's not like that. It's just a way. It's a package for me to put it in so I can hide it, right? So I'll sort of show you. If I wanted to grab this box, I could go over here and these little buttons along the top here. I usually select the one that's a plane with a circle on it, right? And it creates a new layer. I'll call this layer. If I double click on it, it opens up this edit layer. I'll call this model layer. It won't allow you to put spaces in there, so hit save. So with this model layer, if I click this little V, it will hide and unhide, right? And if the way it is right now, I can select my object, but if I want to kind of lock that so I can't select it, if I go over here, I'm going to skip the P for right now, go to this little empty spot and click that, you'll see a T in there. Now you can still see the object, it's just sort of grayed out, right, and transparent. That's called template mode. It's templated. And I can't select it and do anything to it, right? There's still a way to select it, but I can't right now once in template mode. If I hit it one more time, there's an R. That's reference mode. which means although it looks just like the other object, if I drag to select it, it's only going to select the other objects. I can't select it in here. So this is kind of a way that you can lock objects so you don't accidentally mess them up, right? And the cool thing again is I can hide it if I don't want to mess with it right now, right? Now let's say I made this layer and was like, ah, crap, I meant to put both of these objects in that layer. If I select my other object and go over here to model layer, I can right click and add selected objects. And now both of those are referenced. And I can turn off the visibility of both of those. So I'm going to go ahead and unreference that. And don't be afraid, like if I delete this layer, nothing happens. They're just now no longer in a layer, right? So those are all kind of organizational for you to be able to organize what is sort of being shown in your viewport. Now you'll also notice that there's animation layers. Like what we're looking at is display layers. There's also animation layers. We're not talking about those today. Those get really complicated, but they're super cool. Basically, it's a way of having more than one animation on an object at a time, and then you can blend those together. And it's a really nice way of doing some pretty complex animation. Okay, so I want to point out that this is all kind of called the channel box and the layer editor. It's all just kind of one thing that's always together. And if you look down the side of our interface, you'll see these tabs. See this channel box, layer editor, and then right below that is modeling toolkit. So if I click that, it's going to expand out into my modeling toolkit. So there's a bunch of tools in here for modeling. We're not going to go through all of them. If I click below that, we're going to get the attribute editor. And the attribute editor is kind of like a more robust version of your channel box. Your channel box are just your most commonly used attributes that you would change. Translate, rotate, scale. Oh, I didn't show you. Visibility is also on there. We'll come back to, well, yeah, let me go ahead and go back to it so you can see. In your channel box, you get your visibility here, and it's set to on. You can type off, and you'll see that it's invisible even though I still have it selected. Be careful about deselecting it, because then you can't reselect it to turn it back on, right? You can. I'll show you that in just a second. So to turn that back on or off, you can also use 0 or 1. 0 is off, 1 is on. So I can type in 1 on visibility, and it'll turn it back on. Yeah, so I'll show you this here in just 1 second. So again, modeling toolkit is where a whole bunch of modeling tools live. And then the attribute editor is where a whole bunch of more attributes about this object exist, including its material. So if we got here, you'll see this Lambert 1. This is where the model's material is. So if I wanted to change these to be green, I can double click on color, choose green, and hit done. Now recognize that I only changed one object's material and they both changed colors. We'll be talking about that more next class period. So don't sweat that, and we can always undo that if you want to. So the attribute editor is where a lot of different things are, and you'll see that there's different tabs, and a lot of this isn't going to make sense to you. Like, what's the difference between p-cube, p-cube shape, and polycube? Well, there's differences. It's just, it's a little confusing. Some of them are how the object was made. Some of them are how the object is displayed. But know that a lot of if there's an attribute about that object, it's going to be hiding somewhere in your attribute editor. Now, if you look along the top here, we got a few more things. So, like, you see these 5 buttons that go along the top here? These 5 buttons that go along the top? Those sort of coincide with these side tabs, right? So if I click that, you'll see I'm back at the channel box. If I click this one, it's the attribute editor again. And this one over here is the modeling toolkit. Now there's 2 other buttons in here. One looks like a little bitty person with an Iron Man thing on his chest. It is not the Iron Man button. It is the character controls. Don't even worry about this one because very few people ever use this because Human IK kind of sucks. There's better ways of creating rigs. And then there's another one right here that has a little hammer and 3 dots. And that's going to actually open up a menu that floats. So this is your tools settings. Again, you'll probably forget this. I'll be reiterating it as we go along. this is the setting for whatever tool you have selected. And currently we have the scale tool selected. And so this is some of the attributes for our scale tool. If I go to my move tool, you'll see I get slightly different attributes for that tool. A lot of times people will mount this in the user interface right here. So if you drag a menu somewhere and an area lights up, I can release it and it will mount it there. Right? And I can also sort of click this tab to minimize it or make it bigger. And I can tear that off, throw it away. Which will bring up a quick thing that I kind of left out of the menu. If we go all the way up here to the top, this workspace area, right now we're set to Maya Classic. All this is presets for how all of your menus are laid out. So if I go down here to like animation and click that button, it lays out Maya completely differently. Right? So I'll go back to Maya Classic. So just recognize that you can control this interface and reshape it however you want. Now, before we get down to the bottom, I still want to show you one more thing in sort of this middle section, this big middle section. So let's go ahead and recreate what we had done earlier in my channel box. I select this box, I go to visibility, and I turn it off. I'm like, okay, I'm just going to do something else, and then I click, and I'm like, uh-oh. Now, how do I get that object back? Okay, so Maya has another menu that a lot of people use quite a bit, and sometimes it launches like automatically open, sometimes it doesn't. It's called the outliner. So the outliner is like your Windows folder structure, right? If you were to go back to this thing here, like this thing that happens along the side down here when we expand this out, right? It's got all of your stuff here, and within that you'll see like all of your files, right? If I have any files. Do I have files? No files. Okay. So the outliner is kind of like that, right? I don't remember why I have this open. Oh, yeah, it was. And it's kind of, it's actually really handy. So there's two different ways you can get the outliner. You can go to Windows, Outliner, and the Windows menu option will be available in all of the different menu options. Actually, the first, everything up to Windows is available in all of them. Also, Help is available in all of them. So if you go to Windows, Outliner, it pops up this thing along the side. Now, just like anything else, like we did in Maya, if I drag and select this sphere, you'll see it highlights P Sphere 1. That's the name of our sphere, right? You'll see that one of these is kind of grayed out. Actually, several of them are grayed out. But P Cube 1 is grayed out. That's our cube we just hit, right? And so if I select that, you'll see visibility is turned off. There's also a shortcut key to hide and unhide to turn on that visibility. It's Control H hides it, Shift H brings it back. So we've already hidden it, so Shift H will bring it back. Control H will hide it. Okay. So if I want to bring that back, I can select here and I can either type in 1 to bring it back, or I can do Control H or Shift H. You'll also notice that there's a little button right here that will open and close our outliner. Quick thing I kind of skipped over that I will show you really quick before we get down into the animation tools. I'm trying to actually remember how far I get with this. Yeah, I don't actually... Yeah. Okay, that's cool. So, a couple of quick things. First, you're going to forget a lot of this, right? And that's okay. Usually when you forget something, if you can kind of phrase it in some way, Google is your best friend, right? I forget stuff all the time. I'm like, what's the name of that tool? And I'll Google it. It's like the thing that makes the slices on the model. It's the Insert Edge Loop tool, right? I really don't forget that one, but you will. You'll forget things like that. And that is a great way of like, I mention that because although I strongly encourage you, you have some questions, like contact me, I'll help you work them out. A lot of times, I think people will use that as an excuse, like, I can't remember the name of that tool. Guess I'll just have to ask later, and then they just close down Maya and go home, right? And I'm like, or you could have like spent 10 seconds Googling it and found the answer. However, if you spend like more than like 2 or 3 minutes Googling it and can't find the answer, give me a yell. I can usually help you work it out. But learning how to solve problems is a big portion of what you're going to be doing here at ETSU. One of the other really beneficial help options for you, obviously, is YouTube. Like, there's plenty of people. Like, what happens is across the world, there are people in their first Maya class, and they learn something, and they go home and they make a YouTube video about it, right? And they share it with the world. If you Google any question you have, there'll be a YouTube video of somebody trying to explain it to you. They may not do a great job, but it'll help you kind of find that. The other thing that was sort of the official version of help in Maya, and I mentioned it third instead of first because it's more of a learning tool, right? But help in any program is F1. You hit the F1 key, it'll pop up the help. And you didn't see it pop it up because it popped it up in another screen. What? Oh, it's because that's funny. I didn't have Maya selected apparently. Let's try this. F1. There we go. And so it opens up a web page with a lot of information in here. Lot of information in here. Everything from videos. If there's something you're like, I don't understand how that tool's supposed to work, hop in here and just like start clicking through stuff or search for it. Like, what is that? Edge insert. Search for it, and it's like, are you talking about the insert edge loop tool? And I'm like, yeah, that's the thing. And then I click on it, and it's going to give me some information on how to do that, right? There's a couple of other things under the help menu, but the Autodesk Maya help is that. There's also just a bunch of tutorials and just a lot of different things. Learning paths are like these, like, you want to get better at modeling. There are certain things in these things that'll help you like just improve in those areas. So use this whenever you need it. But again, I am kind of I am not. I want to challenge you to try to solve the problem on your own. But if it's slowing you down so much that it's keeping you from being productive, absolutely call me and ask me. Now, the other thing you may have heard from or learned at the Quick Start meeting is that we have tutors in this as well, right? Particularly David. I think we may have another one coming as well. But he'll be hanging out here in this lab. He'll have some hours. Once he's given everybody those hours, I'll post them on the D2L page. And he'll be hanging out in this room certain nights, in the back of the room usually, wearing one of those like security vests that the guys are walking around out here in the construction site. That's so you know he's the tutor, right? Also, it's so you know when David takes off that vest, he's just another student, and he is not obligated to talk to you for hours at that point, because he's doing classes as well, right? But he is extremely helpful. He's really good at this. He's one of the honors students. And occasionally we'll have other tutors as well. So there's lots of resources, but if you kind of look around, there's approximately 25 other resources in this room too, right? And so if you're in this room, you're like, he said that thing. What was the thing? You could always ask that person too, right? And that really does help build sort of a community of support for that. So it kind of got off on a tangent there. So I'm going to go through this bottom part kind of quick, mainly because we're not going to be using it today. We'll be using it in a few days here. But the thing I want you to recognize is we have some animation stuff at the bottom, right? We have this play button. We have this time slider. So the time slider, you'll see that frame 1 is highlighted. And if I click and drag, it's going to take me to other frames of the animation. Now, this is interesting to think about. What is a frame of animation? Anybody? What does that mean?
It's kind of like just a picture that's been set in a sequence of other pictures.
Right. So film, any video, is just a sequence of pictures, right? A sequence of images. And so each of these lines are an image that can be generated out of Maya, right? So, but it's going to work the same way that any other timeline would. If you're scrubbing on the YouTube timeline, that direction is later in time, this direction is earlier in time, right? And we just have a series of frame numbers. Now those numbers may be a little confusing. actually have a quick little graph in here. Don't, not sure I want to show all of it. I will open it, but I will hide part of it. Okay. So I will move this in here. So kind of ignore the bottom part of this because this is about animating on twos. But if we look at this top part up here, just ignore the bottom part. If we have a second of animation, that means we have a sequence of images, but how many images, right? So 1 second, that length doesn't change, right? We are always at, like 1 second is always going to be 1 second. I mean, unless you're getting into physics and you deal with gravity and all that, but we're not gonna. The number of frames that make up 1 second of animation changes depending on what you're talking about. If you're talking about film, it's 24 frames a second. So it's 24 images in 1 second of animation. If you're talking about video, it's usually approximately 30, 29.97 or something like that. That's why film and video feel a little different, right? And interestingly, 24, even though that's fewer frames in a second, we're used to seeing really high quality things in that. Like we watched Avengers or whatever at 24 frames a second, and we're like, that's big budget. 24 frames a second looks cinematic. It's like, it feels more expensive, right? It feels like that's the good one. Whereas a sitcom and a soap opera is filmed at 30 frames a second. And even though that's more frames, more information for your eyes, the way things move, like sort of to us feels kind of off and feels like, the budget of this was like $15 or something, right? Recognize that that's kind of changing. Some films are being shot at 30 or even 60 frames a second, so your eyes will get used to it, and you'll actually start to see that depending on refresh rates. But generally, it's still relatively true. 24 frames a second if something is going to film, 30 if it's going to video. Now, games get a little more confusing. Games are usually wanting to refresh at 60 frames a second, but there's not really a reason to animate at 60. You'll probably animate at 30, and it will just subdivide each of those frames in the engine. Right? It gets even more confusing if you start adding virtual reality to that, because virtual reality basically is a video game for each of your eyes. And you, like currently the Oculus, their standard to get into the storage, you have to be able to maintain at least 72 frames a second. You can still understand virtual reality at a lower frame rate than that. You just start getting a little motion sick, right? So some places even want to hit 90 frames a second. Eventually, it'll be 500 gazillion a second. So like who cares? But right now, our standard right now is 24 or 30. Maya, and this stuff down at the bottom, this is when we're talking about 2D animation, just for future reference. 2D animation, we'll talk about animating on ones or animating on twos. Twos mean you're doing one drawing for every 2 frames. So you do a drawing and you hold it for frame 1 and then frame 2. Then you do another drawing and you hold back for frame 3 and frame 4. So you got 4 frames of animation with only 2 drawings. And that's because drawing takes a lot of time. And that makes it a little bit less expensive to produce. You'd be surprised the number of animations you watch that are animated on 2s. A lot of anime is actually animated on 3s because you just have to produce a lot of that, right? Like there's just big chunks of it, smaller teams, lower budgets. Everything we're going to be doing in 3D, though, the computer is doing all of the drawings for us, right?
Yeah, so I don't get it. Like, what?
So we're animating on ones. Like, we're leaving it on one. Like, we will render one image for each of these. Does that make sense? So that's why I was kind of like, ignore this bottom part. Really, that top line is the only one that applies to us. I will say, though, you've probably heard about ones and twos in your Instagram or Facebook feed. Did I just make myself an old man by saying Facebook? I did, didn't I? So everybody's like, Facebook. I read about that. Somebody Snapchatted me about Facebook once. So you've probably seen these videos going around about Into the Spider-Verse, right? That Miles was animated on tubes, right? And that actually gives you a little bit more of that chunky, like clunky feeling. Actually, as the movie goes on, he starts to be animated on ones, and the style of animation gets more elegant, just showing like the awkward, like teenager, like how he moves is a little bit more awkward. And as he gets more in control of everything, he becomes more confident and more able to move smoothly. So it's an animation technique. For us though, 3D animation, almost all the time, with the exception of Spider-Verse and a few productions that have been kind of experimental, almost all the time, we don't have to worry about it. The computer will draw every frame for us, so we just animate on ones, right? So again, like this part, a little bit of a tangent. The biggest thing to remember, 24 frames per second is for what? Film, something, yeah. 30 frames per second?
No. Oh, yes.
What was it?
It's for animating, right?
Well, for film, for video, for whatever. So actually, Maya is got a bunch of numbers here. We need to know how many of those numbers are going to play back in a second. Right? Actually, if I hit the play button right now, it's really, really fast. It's like 500 frames a second, right? So actually, Maya is defaulting to 24 frames a second. What's happening right now is Maya's playing those frames as fast as it can. So if you decide to start experimenting around with animation early, if we right-click on here and go to playback speed, you'll see that right now what it's doing is it's playing every frame as fast as it can. And so depending on how fast your computer is, it'll play it either really fast or really slow. If I just change this to real time, you'll see that Maya by default was built for film, and it defaults to 24 frames a second. So what we're seeing here is 24. Now that's important later if you're going to be animating something that you're going to put into some video you shot, and you shot that video on your phone, and your phone recorded it at 30, and then you got to do some math. Or you can just change Maya to animate at 30 frames a second. So if you're animating for games, you change it to animate at 30 frames a second. Timeline got a little confusing, and I probably delved into it a little too much. That's because I'm an animator. I like the timeline is my bread and butter. I live in there. So this timeline right now, we see it goes from frame 1 to frame 120. At 24 frames a second, who wants to do some math for me? How many seconds is that? So it's, I'm sorry, frame 1 to frame 120. So we have 24 frames per second. How many seconds is 120 frames?
5.5. 5.5.
That's 5. So if you, the way you can think of this is 24, divide that in half because it's going to be 12, right? So it's 120. It can get complicated. I'm confident you all probably have a calculator in your pocket, in your phone. You may actually have an actual, like one of you pull out a TI-85 and start doing graphing stuff. So somebody really has a TI-85. I guarantee they're TI something. So we got those little play buttons at the end. I guarantee you almost all know how to use those. There's a couple of extra ones on here, though. You'll see we have a play backwards button, because that's useful. And it actually really is. So why you would play something backwards is if you watch something play forward over and over again, something that's wrong will start to look right. And if you play it backwards, you'll be like, whoa, what was that? That was a weird like hitch in that. And you can sort of catch some of those. There's also a couple of little like step forward buttons. Some of those will go all the way to the end. Some of them go all the way to the beginning. Some of them will step from keyframe to keyframe. And we'll talk about keyframes later, so don't sweat that. Now, we currently have 120 frames or 5 seconds. But maybe I need to animate more than 5 seconds. Maybe I need to animate 10 seconds. Directly below the timeline, or the time slider, you'll see the range slider. It's this little bar here with these numbers at the beginning and the end, right? So if I click on this little white box at the end of that, I can adjust the range and give myself more range. So now I'm at 200 frames instead of 120. So now my timeline goes from frame 1 to 200. I can type in whatever numbers I want. The outside numbers are your minimum and maximum, and the inside numbers are where you're currently residing, right? So if I only wanted to see range frames 5 through frames 25, I can make my time slider just show me that range. Right? Now, if I wanted to have a 2,000 frame animation, I can do that, and I can use this little slider here to view the entire 2,000 frames, and you can see how slowly that's going to progress. Right? All right. That's a little bit of a, I feel like playing around with the time slider right now is a little bit of a tease because we're not actually going to animate anything today. We are going to be animating some stuff tomorrow, and or not tomorrow, next week, and as the week goes on, we're going to animate more and more and more. So, couple of little things I'll show you out here. Currently, we're playing back at 24 frames a second, so that's your playback speed. That is not, if you change that to something else, that's not changing your frame rate, though. That's just playing how it's changing back. You'd have to change your settings to change your playback speed. So if we go all the way out here, this little guy with the cog next to him, if we open that, that's where we could change our animation. So it's not time slider, it'll be under animation. No, let's see. Settings, time, 24 frames a second. I would change that to 30. Right? I'm not going to. Whoa. These turned green again. Oh well. Really, I undid too many times. So, we'll get into these animation tools a little bit more. I want to step down one more time to Mel. Mel, that little line that says Mel there, we have two things going on here, right? We have this empty spot here where we can type stuff. Just type anything you want. What do we got here? Greg is cool. Syntax error. So apparently Greg cannot find procedure. Greg is cool. That is where we can type in some script and make stuff happen. The script that we can use there is called Mel script. It's Maya's embedded language. So Maya has its own coding language you can use. And a lot of people said, that's stupid. I already know some other coding language. I want to use that. So if you click that little Mel button, you can also use Python. So if you know some Python scripting or something like that, you can use those. And you can switch back and forth between those. Now, this little area isn't always big enough. So if we go out here to the end and click here on this little white box, it will pop up our script editor. Now, there's some really cool things happening in the script editor. And the thing I would like to point out to you is if I do something in here, and if I select this box, watch what happens up here. I get this select -R pcube1 little piece of code. That's in Mel script. If I were to copy that, let me just copy that, and paste that down here, it will select that cube. Right? So you don't actually have to know how to write code. You can kind of steal some code sometimes too. Yes?
Isn't there a way to make a button for that too? Like
There is. I can kind of show you that. That's one of the things we'll talk about that a little bit more later. But
oh, okay.
yeah, if you wanted to make a button to select that cube, like over here in my custom menu, I can highlight that and then middle mouse click and drag it up to here. Say it's a Mel script, and now I have a button that button will select that cube for me. Right? So there's a lot of cool tools in here. So script editor, don't sweat it too much. We're not going to delve into it too much this year. We're definitely not going to learn any coding languages or anything like that. In fact, I'm not even very good at that, and I've been doing this professionally for like 15 years. I can write a little bit of code. Don't think that you have to. Some people are really good at that, and there are places and careers for that. The last thing I want to show you is maybe one of the first things I should have showed you. This little line all the way along the bottom here. And you'll see that as I move around, different things show up on that bar. That bar is called the help line. All right? Or the help, it is help bar. Help line, I think. Help line sounds nice, right? And so what that's for is if I go over here and I'm like, I wonder what this button here does. It kind of looks like a star. If I mouse over it and look down there at the help line, you'll see it says super shape. Create a polygon super shape on the grid, right click to choose the shape type. It's helping me. So the help line does that. It gives you little tidbits, little notifications on how to use whatever it is you're considering using, right? the other thing to recognize is it kind of just popped up and went away. If I mouse over one of these tools for a while, you'll also see that I get a little help notification that pops up here, right? And including the rotate tool, E. That's the shortcut key for it. Okay. All right. One more thing, maybe kind of two, that I want to show you. I already showed you that Maya is kind of customizable, right? We can move all of this stuff around and create whatever workspace we want to with our little workspace tab here. The other thing I want to show you is the menu. Like all of this stuff that's up here, all of these buttons, there's so many different things. Well, there's a whole set of them that are hidden as well. So just sort of mouse over your viewport here and press your space bar and hold it down. Okay, so this is our entire menu wherever our mouse is. If I move my mouse over here, it'll automatically bring up my entire menu. We call this a marking menu. Now, I'll come back to the marking menu in just a second, but I want you to, instead of pressing and holding your space bar, I want you to tap it. Okay. So this is how we can see multiple views at once. You have to be over top of your viewport, but if I just tap that, you see I'm in my perspective view. If I tap it again, I have perspective, top, front, side, right? And you'll notice over here, all of these other four things that are grayed out, perspective, top, front, side, each of those are cameras. So what I'm actually looking through is the four basic cameras that come in Maya. Now, the perspective view is, well, it's perspective. It means that things get shorter as they get further away, right? I can hold my water bottle up here, and my water bottle is bigger than that cabinet in the back of the room, right? But it's not, right? It's just that way because it's further away from me. Things that are closer look bigger. Things that are further away look smaller. That's what perspective means, right? And you've all probably done some of that before. These other four views aren't like that, right? I'll kind of show you. Like our top view, if I were to grab this sphere here, right, and move it further away, it's not getting any smaller. Like in my top view, that is not getting any smaller. These are called orthographic views. These are for precision, right? Because sometimes that foreshortening is confusing when you're trying to match object sizes. If you've ever seen blueprints or schematics or CAD drawings, those are usually in an orthographic, those are an orthographic drawing with no perspective, so you can have some accuracy. So those aren't very nice for displaying things. It feels very incorrect, but they're really pretty handy to be able to work on stuff, right? If I wanted to go over here to my top view and make sure, I just have to mouse over, tap spacebar, and if I wanted this to be approximately the same size, I can make sure that, you know, sort of scale them up to be the same size as each other, right? So that's where that's really handy, and then I can always go back to here and kind of quickly switch in and out of this. Now, the interesting thing is I can also make more perspective cameras as well. If I want like a camera that's showing my scene from a rooftop and another camera that's up close to my main character and another camera in a car that's driving by, I can make 3 different cameras and do different things with them and switch in and out of those cameras. Right? And all of those would be perspective cameras more than likely. Okay. So back to that marking menu really quickly. I'm just going to go ahead and maximize this. So that marking menu, if I hold that down, again, it's got like file. It's got all the stuff up here in my menu. If I click Maya, you'll see it also has the option to switch in and out of different camera views. So I can go back to my top view if I wanted to. Spacebar, click Maya, top view. What is happening? There it goes. Or back to perspective. Now the reason we call it a marking menu is because if I click and drag, it's like I'm making a mark in a direction, right? So actually, this particular marking menu that has all of this stuff in it is called our, oh, I just lost it. It's not our shelf. What is that called? Oh, it's like one of the first things I ever learned. Hotbox. It's called the Hotbox because I don't know why. But it'll pop up wherever your mouse is whenever you hold down the spacebar. So, like I said, some people like using the menu. Some people like using the hotbox. Some people like using shortcut keys. There's a lot of different things. The other thing I'll say is this is not the only marking menu. For example, there are some move tool options, right? And so if I hold down W and click, I get a whole bunch of different options here. There are some modeling tools. I think if I hold down M and maybe it's not M. What is it? E? E is rotate. I know Shift, right click is some modeling tools. There's just a whole bunch of different ones, right? So marking menus are ways that people work as well to like have quick access to some tools. So there's so many different options to this. Maya is really overwhelming, and I just tried to cram all of that into one day. I guarantee you there's some stuff that you're like, oh, that was cool, and I didn't write that down, and I'm never going to remember that. But I've been doing this for a long time, so you can ask me, and I'll tell you. That's kind of the transaction we're making here. So I think that the most important thing to remember about today. Let me just start this off with a question. How many of you feel a little overwhelmed? No. Okay. You're supposed to, right? That is like, anybody know how to play the clarinet? Okay, one person, two people. Oh, cool. Three people. My wife is a clarinet player, and I was a baritone player. It has 3 buttons. These 3 fingers is all you need to play that. You got to do some stuff with your mouth too. And she like shows me the clarinet, and I'm like, I don't even know what this little flange thing does. Like, what is happening with it? Like, this is like it's like it looks like something out of a steampunk movie. Like, yeah, you should be overwhelmed the first day somebody hands you a clarinet, but you know how to play a clarinet now, right? You figured out what all those were. This is not my first rodeo at teaching this class too. I've sat here with people in this class who were like completely befuddled. I have had people come to my office after this class, after the first day inside of Maya, crying and telling me that today just told them they're not cut out for this. I'm never going to remember all this. So let me just go ahead and squash that now. Yes, you are. You are completely capable of doing anything you want to do, right? And that feels like I'm like, oh, like, yeah, I'm going to give a motivational speech. But here's the thing. There's this idea. Actually, you had a question when you go, right? Or were you?
No, I thought I could one up the baritone. I play trombone.
Baritone. Yeah, I got those 3 buttons. I didn't even have to use my pinky, which I've already established is not very functional. The thing to sort of think about this is we all kind of come into the arts because somewhere along the way, some well-meaning person told us we were talented. Right? We all have that aunt or that math teacher or whatever. Oh, that's such a good drawing. You're so talented. I can't draw a circle, right? I'm like, all right. So let me just go ahead and squash that now too. You're not talented. Because talent doesn't exist. Talent is a word that was invented by lazy people to explain why they're no good at something that's really hard to do. Nobody was born good at Maya. Nobody was born able to play the baritone or the clarinet or the ukulele. All of that comes from effort, right? And everybody sucked at this at first. Like every human being who sat down at Maya, from animators at Pixar to you, are going to struggle with this at first. That's the natural order of how things should work. The thing that determines on whether you're going to be successful at this or not is whether you work at it, whether you put the effort into it. Right? And I feel like it's worth mentioning again. I think I mentioned this to you all. Olivia Whitaker, or used to be Olivia Lutz, was a student I had. I remember her when she was a freshman. Yeah. She just started as an animator at Pixar. from here. Like there was a point where she did not know how to use Maya, and now she works at Pixar. There was a point where I didn't know how to use Maya, and I've made a very happy career out of this. It's okay to not know how to do this right now, and I promise you, you can. Question is, will you? That's what I want you to chat. That's my challenge right now. I want you to put the effort into this. And the effort is going to be much easier now at the beginning of the semester when you don't have an English paper due and when you don't have a math quiz and all of that stuff, or maybe you do, I don't know. All that's going to be easier to invest a little bit of extra time now, right? So let's go ahead and, the thing we'll go ahead and do now, after my little mini pep talk, we'll go to week 1 and we'll kind of look at what we need to do this week. Okay, so we've already talked about these first two. Animation is awesome. You got a discussion post to do by tonight. And it's, who are all these people? I don't know. You got a discussion post due by tonight. You got a quiz due by Sunday. That quiz is going to open up week 2 through week 15. Blah, blah, blah. You've heard all this before, right? You got to do those two things. We meet again on Tuesday. Not a week from today. We have a weekend. You have Friday. You have, I think you all probably already aware of this. Monday is Labor Day, and so there's no classes on that day. So even though we wouldn't have had class that day, if you have another class, don't go to it. Stay home, sleep. But I would like to give you a little exercise or a little challenge on stuff to be doing for Tuesday. Okay. Now we're going to show these off in class on Tuesday, but how you're going to turn this in is in the week 2 discussion post. Okay. So you're going to plop that up there and we're going to talk about it a little bit because this is sort of the beginning of a much larger project. So let's go down here all the way to the bottom, this bridge construction assignment. Before I click on that, I'll point out right up here, bridge files. I'm going to right click on that and say open link in new tab. And you're going to see it takes me to this. If I open a new window, apparently I didn't need to do that anyway. It's going to take me to this OneDrive. There's a 15 megabyte file in here. What I'm going to go ahead and do is download that. You can download it as well, but I'll go ahead and put it up there. ETSU E3. I will also go ahead and put that into the DIGM classes under resources. For some reason, this takes a minute sometimes for this to select.
What would we turn in the bridge if we're done with this?
Next week in the discussion is where we'll post it in there.
In discussion, okay.
So under Greg, I'll put this under POA resources bridge zip. Okay. So there's still one more Maya thing we're going to talk about. I'm going to go ahead and get this file. So I went ahead and put it up here in the class resources for you, Greg, POA resources. So first things first, do not double click on this. Like, if you double click on it, it's going to try to extract it. You're going to lock the file, and other people can't get it, and you may accidentally save over it. Copy this to your computer or to your hard drive. I'm going to go ahead and put mine on my D drive. Maybe you would want to put it on the share drive. Maybe if you brought your little lanyard, you got it the thing that has the hard drive on it. Whatever. You're going to need to take this file home with you, bring it back, keep working on it. So I'm going to go ahead and say copy. And I'm going to put mine on, for now, just so I can work along with you on here. Do I have a folder? I don't. I'm going to make one. And I'm just going to go ahead and paste that in here. Okay. So we got one more kind of, it's kind of warm in here. Why is the temperature so messed up?
Because there's so many people in this room, probably.
I guess, but it's usually cold.
Yeah.
Like I think
The
the
machines also.
yeah, but I mean, I don't know. It's warmer than usual, is what I'm saying. So, so this is a zip file. I know this kind of struck me the other day. I was chatting with somebody. I've chatted with other people before, and I recognized that the world is different than I thought it was. I I grew up in like the first thing you wanted to do is like I want a computer, and like everybody had a computer, a laptop, something. Everybody, and I realized that there are some of you who grew up in a time where you didn't need one, right? You had tablets, or you had a mobile device, or if it was just for gaming, maybe you just had a console, right? A personal computer is not something that everybody grew up around, and so sometimes folder structures, all that stuff is not as transparent as it actually was like 10 years ago. Strangely enough, and I know a good portion of you probably did. A lot of you like that, but just to kind of let you know, like some stuff that may seem obvious, not always obvious. Like what a zip file even is, right? So a zip file is an archive, and it's an archive of different files. So if I right-click on here, I'm going to go ahead and go to 7-zip, and I'm just going to say extract files. So it's going to give me this option. Where do you want to extract these files to? That's fine. And I'll hit OK. And so now I have, this is kind of annoying. I didn't really want to do that. So now I have bridge, and underneath that I have bridge. So I didn't really want both of those, because really I just want this bottom bridge. So there's a couple different ways you can do that, but I'm actually just going to hit Control X to cut that out of there. Go back to Greg. Control V. Control V. No, it won't let me do that. Oh, it did do it. Okay. So now I can just get this bridge file, right? Another way you can extract this, I think, is you go to 7-zip, extract here. That may do it without the folder. So, so either way, I get this folder, and inside this folder is a whole bunch of stuff, right? So we need to talk about this folder. This folder is actually really important, okay? In Maya, whenever you're creating something, you are creating a Maya file, a .mb file. It stands for Maya binary. There's also a Maya ASCII file, but don't worry about that right now. A Maya binary file is where like your models are going to live and stuff like that, right? But there's a lot of things that are associated with your Maya exercise or assignment that are not actually files that live inside of that MB file. They're things that have to live outside of that, right? How many of you have had the Premiere class, or the class where you use Premiere, visual effects, right? So just like in that, in Premiere, right, your videos don't live inside of your PROJ file, right? They are outside of it, and you're referencing those in. And all of you probably know the headache of like getting here and you have your Premiere file and realize you left all of your video files at home, so there's nothing you can do. Right? Maya is the same way. There's a lot of things that have to live nearby Maya. And so any Maya project that you're working on actually has a folder structure that everything should stay inside of, right? Everything related to this bridge project should always live inside of this bridge folder. Nothing related to it should ever be saved or stored outside of it. I'm just going to go ahead and get rid of that zip just so it's less confusing. Everything related to this project always needs to be under here. Okay? And the reason for that is, let's say like you'll see in here we have a whole bunch of folders that already exist. I'm going to save my Maya scenes under this scenes folder, right? So if I click on that, you see this bridge deconstructed.mb. That's the Maya file we're going to look at. Later, I'm going to render some stuff. It's going to put those under images. Maybe I'll texture something. I'll store those texture files, those JPEGs that have like brick on them or whatever. I'll store those under source images, right? And if I have that stored in my documents at home or something, and I come here to render it, well, Maya can't find your documents folder at home, right? Not from here. So it has to be in here to work. And if you take stuff out of there, if you save stuff somewhere else, stuff just breaks, right? So this is where you always want to put everything when you're working on this bridge. Now, on top of that, we have to let Maya know that that's where we're going to be working. So I'm going to go File, New Scene, just to sort of get rid of all this stuff. And then I'm going to go File, Set Project, and tell Maya that for while I'm working on this, my project is going to be in C drive? Yeah. Greg. There. I just select this bridge folder and I hit set. Okay. That means whenever Maya goes to save something, it's going to go to that bridge folder. Whenever Maya goes to open something, it's going to go to that bridge folder. Whenever I render out images, they're going to go to that bridge folder. Right? Everything is going to stay in there. So I have to set my project like at the beginning. That's one of the first things I should do when I start working on something. Set my project for where I want it to be. This requires you to be a little organized. I've worked with some students recently who just set their project to their hard drive, like to their C drive. And so that means like they've been doing that for multiple classes, and they just have this massive dump in their C drive that makes no sense. I'm like, what are all these files? They don't know either. So, so it's like it's not a good way. So that's why it's bridge, nicely organized. I'll show you how to generate those later. But what we're going to do is I'm going to go to File, Open Scene, and what I'm going to open is when I do that, it immediately goes to my Scenes folder in the Bridge folder, right? Bridge Scenes, and I'm going to hit Bridge Deconstructed and hit Open. Don't save. So this is what we get. Actually, I'm going to go ahead and just temporarily minimize this and go ahead and open back up that D2L just so you can see this. So let's look at the assignment. What is the write-up for the assignment? So you can download that. If you forget it, you can download it at home too. So now you've successfully manipulated objects and navigated the 3D scene, but the only way to get good at this is to practice, so small exercise. First download the files. Then we're going to unzip it. Right? And then what we're going to do is we're going to turn this thing we just opened into this. Okay, all the pieces are there for it. I didn't forget any. This is what you're going to be creating. Now, not the turntable. This is an example so you can see what it looks like. In case you forget this or you're in your Maya file, you don't have D2L open, a lot of that stuff is saved under here as well. So I have this example MP4. We can open that up and see it on here. I think. So all the pieces for this are in this folder, or are in this Maya file. So, yeah. So there's an explanation about it here if you want to watch through that. This is going to be turned in on the homework assignment or your discussion, right? On week 2. Right, so this is really just me working on this. But even more so, we're going to continue to build on this all the way up through week 3. It's actually turned in at the beginning of week 4. That's going to be project 1. So this is the beginning of project 1. We're together just going to put project 1 together, collectively. So I wanted to not use the word together 3 times in one sentence. So let me show you what it's actually going to look like. We'll look at the project a little bit later because we're not really to that point yet. Eventually, what we're going to have in this scene, we'll actually see this assignment next week. Looks like this. That's not it. Oh yeah, it is.
So cute.
So this is what we're going to be making. I just want to move it.
Can we color the bridge?
Yep, you can make it yours in all sorts of different ways. But we're going to be slowly working on that. Right now, the biggest thing I need you to be practicing, or the reason I give you this exercise. Oh, somebody's still needing admission. The biggest thing you're going to be practicing on this is those things we looked at in the viewport today, right? Alt. So I want to tumble around. What is that? Alt. Left click, right? That'll let us tumble around here. Alt right click will let us dolly in and out. Alt middle click, pan side to side. We're going to have to start moving some of these things around, right? Grab this. What button is the move tool?
W.
W. Okay, and I'm start moving these things over here. I'm going to slowly start putting stuff together. Now recognize that I can, if I'm trying to get something really precise, I can also type numbers in over here, right? Maybe that number is 0. Is it? It is. So don't just try to guess all of those, because trust me, you can break stuff pretty bad by just by just highlighting all of those and naming in a number. We got to rotate stuff. So E will rotate, right? I try to rotate it. I try to get it perfectly straight. But if I look over here, perfectly straight for this, maybe 0, right? Or maybe it's 180, or maybe it's 90. So all of these are just different numbers you can type in. But really what this is about is practicing this, right? Because right now we're in a situation, right? Now this is like straight on. I'm like, I need to see this from a different angle. I need to be able to get it over there at that bridge a little closer. And that means you have to start tumbling. You have to start moving around your scene. So Alt, click, we're going to tumble. And just basically we have until Tuesday to put this thing together. Yes?
So is there a way when we're putting this together to snap the objects together so we don't have to worry about gaps or overlapping? Because I thought there was a way to do that with the vertices and stuff.
There is. Yeah.
They don't like even in the example there were like gaps, so it's like
Yeah, the gaps are kind of. I have some intentional gaps in there that are there just for like the spacing. So you'll kind of. I'll kind of show you what I'm talking about. But there is, and I can show you that as an example. I'm say. Sorry. Yeah, if you look over here, like as we get a little closer, why is this not playing? Really? So as I pause it there, you see we got like little gaps in there just so you can see that better. And I'm not going to force you all to be. It doesn't have to be perfect. Like get it kind of visually perfect, aesthetically, not perfect, aesthetically pleasing, right? I'm not going to be like, oh, that middle post, it's a millimeter too low, right? I don't like. If you want your post to be slightly bigger, that's cool. In fact, after we do this once, I'm going to tell you, you can totally make this your own. If you want to put like giant spikes on the top of it, if you want a giant flag, if you want to do whatever, if you want to create a completely different bridge for your project, that's fine too. This is really just an exercise of moving, rotating, and navigating your scene, right? So if it comes in looking reasonably close to this, it's full credit, right? Basically, I'm giving you the full credit on that. And the way it again is graded is as the discussion post. So if you post something that looks like a bridge in your initial discussion post, you get full credit for that. So it's 3 points for the initial discussion post, and 1 for each of your comments to other people. So, but again, that's next week's discussion post. Right now, I'm just giving you some in-class work time to be working on this. So, questions? Yes.
I was just gonna ask if you could come look at mine and see if this is like okay.
Yep, absolutely.
Later. Yeah.
Other questions? Yes.
Do we export it or do we send you the Maya
We'll talk about that in the discussion post, but basically what you're going to do is we're going to create an animation preview. So, no, I think we do I'll have to look at the discussion post. It's either a JPEG or an animation preview where you can kind of show it off to the group, and that's kind of what you'll be turning in, just an image of it. Now, the final thing we'll be doing 3 weeks from now will be a rendered video. I'm going to show you how to render in Viewport 2.0, which will give you an okay looking video, but I'll also show you how to render in Arnold, which will give you an amazing looking video. So, questions, comments? All right, y'all are doing great. Like, no joke. This is. I know it feels like you got a lot of questions. That's awesome. But the biggest thing to benefit you right now, just hop in there and start working on it. It's really just getting that stress out and getting comfortable in the program. So, all right. Well, going up one more time. Questions, comments. All right. The rest of the class is yours. You can hang out and work on it. I think the class ends at 2:15 or 2:05.
2:30.
Oh, I haven't looked.
Okay. It's a good stab in the dark. No, I do this too something kind of early. Because it's like Tuesday, Thursday classes are
Oh, yeah, bro.
2 hours and 50 minutes is what it usually is. So we started it. Yeah. So yeah, you can hang around, you can work on it, you can head out and grab some lunch, you can do whatever you want to do. The rest of the class is yours. And before I hop around and start chatting individually, I'm going to stop the video and be uploading it to YouTube. So today's entire class, you'll be able to get on YouTube in like 5 minutes. Something like that. All right. Oh, and I'll also be ending the video that we're recording here. So. What'd y'all think of the Zoom meeting? Is that helpful?
Another class I had was
We used to have one called WebEx that worked pretty well too. But yeah, I'm liking this.
He didn't have it set up the same way you did. You just drop it into Chrome. You had to put in the code.
Okay.